We want to welcome everybody who has joined us today. We do the Preserving Our Past workshop series thanks to the generous funding of the Summerlee Foundation and the Summerfield G. Roberts Foundation, so that we can encourage folks to be preservationists and historians in their own hometowns, and giving them the tools to know how to go about that. And our program today is a really great example of preserving modern, current history for future generations. The ladies that are documented in our program today are people that are often preserving their own past and preparing for their futures. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. But I do want to mention that our next program will be on April the 3rd, and that will be Dr. Sidney Thompson. He is a TCU professor and works in our writing center, and he is working on a trilogy of historical novels about Bass Reeves, Deputy U.S. Marshal, and I believe the first African-American U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi. So he's going to discuss how to incorporate historical research into a novel to help flesh out the lives of the characters that they're talking about and put everything in context. So you'll want to sign up for that. Also, you'll want to join us on Instagram and Facebook at Center for Texas Studies at TCU. If you are not already following us, we talk not only about the activities that the center is up to, but also all sorts of tidbits about research and other historical points of interest in Texas. So sign up for that. I want to give a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speaker. At the bottom of your screens, some of you may have already done this before, you'll see a button for chat. And if you would, please ask your questions in the chat box. You can ask them at any time throughout the program, but we will have Alyssa answer those questions at the end. So go ahead and type your questions in at any time. And if we have any additional information for you, we'll be adding it there as well. Now, one other thing I don't want to forget, this program will be available on YouTube in roughly a week to 10 days. So if you have to scoot out early for some reason, you can always go back and catch the end on YouTube. That's the library's YouTube channel, and we'll be sending out that link through all of our sources, so you'll find it. And maybe Linda would even add it in the chat for us, so you'll have it handy. Now, our speaker today is Alyssa Banta, and she is going to talk about her experience documenting the stories of the Texas Ranch Sisterhood. She has traveled the state documenting these women's lives and work and has a terrific story to tell you. She is an award-winning photojournalist and a writer. She has a BA from Austin College and a master's from UT Austin. And her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Smithsonian Magazine, Harper's Magazine, and she's done photography for the UN High Commission of Refugees, for the Red Cross. She is a Fort Worth resident, and we are so lucky to have her here to talk about her book, which you can find at the TCU bookstore or at the Riata restaurant, where I hear they have signed copies. And we'll provide some additional information on that in the chat. So with that, I want to introduce you to Alyssa Banta. Alyssa.
Yay. Thanks, ladies, for the introduction. I just have to say my screen's frozen twice now. So if it freezes, everyone take a deep breath and let me log back on. It won't take but a second. So I'd like to say thank you to, of course, Leanna at the Center for Texas Studies for inviting me, and Linda Barrett, the city archivist, for having hosted this. So I'm going to share my screen and let's see how this goes. Share. Okay, here we go. So the name of my book is The Texas Ranch Sisterhood, Portraits of Women Working the Land. Came out last year. And I traveled for about a year and a half, almost 2 years throughout Texas, documented the lives of 13 different women who live on ranches, work on ranches, married into ranches, inherited ranches, and it's not their hobby. They actually do it full time, and that's how they make their living. This is Jill Miller. She's west of Valentine, and as far as you can see on that horizon, that is all her family's land. So that ranch has been in the family for several generations, and as Jill says, she's lucky because it hasn't been divided yet. What so often happens in these ranches is parts of land get separated out as different people inherit it, and those different parcels end up getting sold out from underneath the family or away from the family, and the land gets made smaller and smaller. So near one of the water pumps on this land, so this is out by El Paso, it's very dry and hot, arid, but there's a water pump, a well, and there's a small leak in the supply line, and that leak gives water to this peach tree. So it's very desolate, and then all of a sudden there's this beautiful peach tree, and Jill and I stood under that peach tree and picked the most delicious sweet peaches. Half of the peach fruit was eaten by wasps and critters, and we just flipped them over, flipped off the wasps, flipped the fruit over, and started eating the fruit, and it was great. We collected as many as we could. So that's an old standing peach tree. That is me on top of a horse. What you see, that metal grate on the ground, that is a watering trough. So that pump that we just left feeds water into these troughs. They've got bars over them so that animals don't step into them. And the horse is turning around to look at me. This is Fawn Kibby. She lives southwest of Alpine. She doesn't own land. Her husband doesn't own any land, but they are ranch managers. And she has done that her entire life. When she was a kid, her summer job was to break horses. And now she's raised sons and lives with her husband on a very humongous plot of land. And here she is bareback riding on one of her horses. And here she is feeding some feed to one of her cows. She's very friendly with some of them. They all come in to eat the same place every day. And so, yeah. And this is her little pony. So what I found so interesting about these women as a whole is how hard they worked, how there was nothing, I think from a Fort Worth perspective, we think it's really quite an exotic, adventurous life. It's just their life. Everything about their life has to do with their ranches and the perpetuation of that life and the ranches. So we are now down in Fort Stockton at the McKinsey Ranch. That's a water supply line that you see running through it. They have leased most of their ranch from the state of Texas, and that is their cold brand on the cheek of their cow. So when they cold brand an animal, those are the ones they'd like to perpetuate. They'd like to continue breeding for whatever reason. They're the right size, they're the right hardiness for the conditions of that property. Animals that don't meet the qualifications during the cull are sent away and slaughtered and turned into meat, but the ones that are kept are usually especially marked or specially marked. And in this case, it's that round cold brand. That it's not a burn. It's the hair is white right there. Cold brand. And this is Lydia after an auction. So every year the McKinseys have a bull auction where they try to earn most of the money that they will make in the year. And people come from all around and bid. And unfortunately, the two auctions that I went to, the 2 years that I went to, the prices just kept going down and down. And the family, I didn't hear exact specifics of it, but the family had a very difficult time sort of monetarily because they put so much effort into buying semen, choosing mates, pairing animals together, breeding bulls, And they're so hopeful that they'll recover all the money that they've spent and money enough to live until the next season. And for the 2 years that I was there, the market was very down. It was very flooded. And so they didn't get the top dollar they were hoping for. And this is Lydia. This is Sarah on her tractor. So lots of manual work, not romanticized by them at all. It's just work they've got to get done. And these families were so great about just letting me in. Sarah was the first family I went to. It was ridiculous. When I first went there, she's out in Fort Stockton in the middle of nowhere with no lights. You have to drive, out west, and then for 8 hours, and then you have to drive south for 2 hours, and you just keep going far, far away. And she said, "Come to my gate. There should be some solar lights that will indicate where I live, and you can turn into that gate." And it's dark. I mean, there's nothing there. There's no houses. It's just a cattle guard on the ground and a gate. And like a little tiny dim solar light was there. And I turned in and I thought, this is either going to be Sarah or somebody with a shotgun at the end of this road. So I drove there. I said, hello, 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 Sarah, it's Alyssa. And she came out and welcomed me. She'd never met me before. Everybody was unbelievably welcoming. Every one of these women just acted like they'd known me a million years. And it was the most refreshing thing, honest. And this is Lydia, her sister. So the McKinseys didn't ranch until their father. It skipped a generation. Their grandpa was a bit of a gambler. The great grandpa was a rancher. And so it skipped a generation. The father came back to the land. And the girls who have master's degrees, after getting educated, came back because they'd like to continue working, living, and having the ranch. A lot of their income in the off season, when they're not selling bulls, a lot of their income has to do with their hay fields. So they also sell big bales of hay, which you see right there. And this is Sarah's wedding. That's her son, and that's her mom. I went to a few of these parties in the time that I did this project. They were unlike any other kind of party I'd ever been to. There's usually some sort of slab of cement, a single light, a band in the corner, and then everybody all night long dances. And it was romantic. It was old-fashioned. It felt traditional. It felt everybody knew everybody. It was a time for neighbors who live 150 miles apart to come together. The parties I went to happened to happen in the summer, in the hot summer. So everybody was out all night. It was lovely. So she had a big dance right there, and that's what that is. This is Debbie Jo Holland, and she's out in East Texas, and they have just cut hay. So once you cut the grass, or what you're going to bale up as hay, you need to let it dry. It can't dry too long. If it dries too long, it loses the protein. If you bale it too early, it molds all the way through and you waste it. So her husband, Terry, is looking at it to see if it's the just right dryness and moistness to bale. This is their home. As Debbie Jo said, we ranch, and everything else, the rest of our lives sort of revolve around that. And that's what they do. And that's their daughter. She's going to continue the tradition. She'd like to keep going. She also raises bucking broncos and bucking bulls, mostly bucking bulls. And they get leased for the local rodeos all around. So she's got a whole herd of bulls. There's feed. They subsidize their grazing with feed. So it's in there. And they do this chore every single day. And there we are in the tractor, baling, big hay bales. This is Danielle Hemphill, and she's north of Coleman, which is out towards Abilene, and then south. And she married into the Hemphills, and they have vast tracts of land on a gorgeous ranch. It's good weather. It's not too arid in Coleman. It's not too cold in Coleman. It's not too wet in Coleman. It's absolutely gorgeous. So this was a working day. They've got several working days, many working days, where they gather extra help and they gather cattle to inoculate them, to separate them, to brand them. There's different reasons why they'll gather, and so this is one of those days. And this is Danielle and one of her pastors. She is a, let me see if I can remember, Texas, she's a beauty pageant in the Texas rodeo. I can't remember exactly her title. Beauty pageant winner. So in the middle of the working day, everybody comes in and the ranch manager's wife cooks food for everybody. Around and you serve yourself, you usually take your boots off. I can see somebody's got their boots on, but usually you're running around there barefoot. You leave your jackets outside and you load up on food and you come and eat. That's her home. And that's Danielle and her father-in-law, who's a vet, Texas A&M trained vet, and her daughter and her son. And this is, they're going to inoculate the animals and then they're going to ear tag them. Part of Danielle's deal is that she really thinks it's important. Her kids, she says, she likes to say, are fifth generation ranchers on that very land. And she has really made it a mission of hers, among so many other things, to make sure her kids know where they come from and what they have and how mostly to take care of it so that it can stay in the family. And that little steer is being held down. He's fixing to get his shots. He's probably getting, what's he getting done? He's probably getting other shots done to him. And he may be having his testicles cut off. So yeah. Here we are moving and herding animals from one pasture to the next. So pastures are big sections of land, if you can imagine that. And they've got T-posts in the ground and then 5 strands or whatever it is, 8 strands of barbed wire run across them. And they're huge, 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 huge areas. And when you need to move animals from one to the other, you've got to get a fleet of cowboys behind them. First of all, the fleet of cowboys turn up into the pasture, go into the 4 corners, and then slowly funnel those animals into this gate and move them into the next pasture. So while I was there, Danielle's grandma was dying, and these are her last couple days in the hospital. And that goes back to how welcoming, open, loving, full on, come on, Alyssa, be a part of what I've got. I'll show you everything these women were to every single one of them. None of them I felt held back. None of them had, and they were just so open. And I tried to do them justice and I tried to be respectful of that. So here we are out again, southeast of Marathon, and this is Ann Doherty. She is a good example. All her kids, she's a good example of what sometimes happens in Texas with the ranches now. All of her kids are educated and have moved off the ranch. She and her siblings inherited property from their father and uncles, et cetera. That sort of that line, that generation inherited families from her father and then from her uncles. And some of that family sold land off. So in order to get to any parcel that she still owns, you have to drive through tracts that were, as recently as her father's generation, owned by the same family, but have now been sold off to other people. And part of the worry of ranchers is that land is pulled out of production. It ends up being vacation spots or places where people run ATVs, and it stops being production land. Now she has a couple of goats that are still alive after her after careers as pet goats with her children, and these are some of her other dogs, or her dogs. So Anne still takes care of. She's got like 5 goats still. She takes care of. Her dogs are very trained. You can whistle to them. She whistles to them certain ways. She says a few words to them, and they know how to go, come, move animals from the left side to the right side. Very smart animals. This is Tammy Fisher. She's southwest of Sonora, way down south by the Mexican border. And she inherited land as well, big, beautiful tract of land, a ranch that belonged to her aunt. And she uses that land to do sheep and to have hunting leases on them. So she wildlife manages there, and has somebody out of Houston, last I heard, who leases the land for hunting, deer hunting lease. And here are some of her flock. Her family has, I believe it's from World War I, a contract with the US government to produce some of the wool that goes into military uniforms. And this is ear tag day. She still runs some cattle as well. And she is a lawyer. She's a trained lawyer out of Lubbock. She went to Tech and decided to come back, decided this is what she wanted to do instead. So I was over there in the winter at one point, and it was very freezing cold with whipping wind. And we saw a little baby lamb laying in the middle of the yard. And Tammy explained that her mom, as Tammy said, her mom must have left her, had to have left the lamb there for some reason, abandoned it. It was either that she couldn't take care of it, she was wounded, she was hurt, or she had something was going on. Come to find out, so we picked the lamb up, put him on the floorboard to try to save him. He ended up dying. But we found out as we were driving away, we saw the mother behind some brush with 2 other lambs. So the mother had birthed 3 and could only keep 2. Just there was no way she'd have enough to feed all 3 of them. So she just left one. And Tammy's different. Tammy doesn't use horses. She uses these ATVs to round up her herd. And there she is with 2 of her workers that help her on this ATV. You can see the front of the ATV I was riding, and the dog. What was so funny to me, not funny, ha ha, but surprised that out of me. Somebody from Fort Worth, Texas turns up at your doorstep. You're on a big ranch. The first thing they all did, the first morning I was there, is they all put me to work. And they saw me as somebody able-bodied, willing, quick to learn. I helped as much as I possibly could. I hope in my heart that I wasn't a liability to their day, to the rhythm of their day, but they definitely put me to work. This is Jean Ann Forte, and she's north of Fort Davis and out of Alpine as well. And she is also multi-generational rancher. She still runs some cattle. And a few years back, there was a great big fire that happened in that neck of the woods, and it ran through her property, and they were able to save all of the animals. And she talked at length about that, and I put a bunch of information about that in the book. It really was something for her that that fire was raging so, and none of the animals were killed. And this is her backyard, if you can imagine. So this is the small little pasture right behind her house. And this is Missy Bonds, and she's where Saginaw and Fort Worth meet. So right up there where all that development is on 820 and Bonds Road, Bonds Ranch Road. All that used to be her grandpa's land. Her daddy's the guy on the left in the khaki shirt. And Missy Bonds went to TCU, the ranch management course, and graduated from there. Her family owned a lot of land. Her grandparents did, and when Pete came around and started managing it, he began at some point when Missy was in college selling the property off, and so their holdings has truly reduced, but they've become more cattle traders. Here she is. What they end up doing is leasing land from ranches all over Texas, putting animals on that land, and then selling those animals. And as Missy says, the cattle that she moves onto the land are sold before she moves them on there. So she checks the commodities market. She's very much on the business end of ranching. Here she is with the man whose land she's leasing from, and they're going over numbers, trying to figure out how much his due is, how much she's going to pay him. So they find people that own land that aren't really interested in running cattle operations. They rent that land per animal per season. It may or may not include basic vet care. It may not, or may not include someone feeding and watering the animals. But Missy always says that they're very, on their end, they're very good about making sure the fences work, upgrading the troughs, upgrading as much as they can to make that particular parcel of land worthwhile. And then Missy trucks in hundreds of animals or whatever the number is. She buys them at auctions, she buys them all over the place, and she trucks them in. They spend however long she's calculated there, either a season to grow, either a season or to finish out, whatever they need to do there. And then they get picked up again and moved on to the next spot, which is either a slaughterhouse or to be sold, whatever they're going to do with them. So I'm at Missy's house, at the junction. There we go. I accidentally hit my mute button. We're at the junction of Saginaw and Fort Worth, and you can see where their land ends and where Saginaw and North Fort Worth rooftops begin. It really made me very sad to be out there. And I think Missy's very grateful for the way her father's managed the sale of that land, but at the same time would probably have liked him not to have, but he had to have at his time, or he believed that was the right business thing to do, and that's great. But it is stark how ranch and house just butt up right against each other. Missy's mother said that it was so disconcerting during any holidays, 4th of July, fireworks are going off, the animals are freaked out, people are on their land. It's a little bit of a clash right there. So this is Mitzi King Mays, and she is in Coleman proper. And that is her dog Jigger. There she is cooking a steak. So this little calf was born a minute ago, a minute before we got there, or whatever it was, an hour before we got there. He was brand spanking new. He was so very new. And his mom was off screen where you can't see her eating. So according to Mitzi, the mom communicated to the calf, lay low, lay very flat. I'm going to go eat and I'll be right back. So that's what that calf's doing. He's very content. He's deep in the grass and he's hoping to be invisible to any predators that there may be. And Mitzi has a little bit of a cross of Wagyu in her beef cattle. she's trying to figure out if that's something that she wants. It's a fattier animal, and we'll see what she does. And this is Rachel Millard, and she is southwest of Plata, which is, I believe, still unincorporated Texas. It is also on the southern border, and she lives out there with her 4 boys, and they just had a daughter last year. And they are homeschooled, deeply Christian, deeply traditional, everything from scratch kind of family. And those boys are very capable. The oldest, who's standing on the ground looking at that, I think it was a wasp's nest or something like that, a wasp nest maybe. He can shoe a horse. You know, he's a little boy. These are all under 10. Maybe he's 10 now, but they are little tiny kids, and they are unbelievably good at being help on that ranch. This is homeschooling, so Rachel reads out of the Bible to help them learn how to read. It's part of her curriculum. It was a great family to visit as well. Rachel's doing a pregnancy test. I think probably most of you, even all of us in Fort Worth, have heard about that. You put on a long, it's sort of like a big, it's made out of plastic, similar to Ziploc plastic, sort of thin, thick plastic. And it's a big, long glove, and it goes all the way to your armpit. And you reach into the cow's rectum and feel down to see if you feel a calf in the uterus. And here Rachel is taming the horse, breaking that horse, taming it. Which means he's not worn a saddle. He's not used to people handling him. He's not interested in being ridden. And you've got to get to a point where he wants to be. Rachel says that she only can keep animals that she can trust, you know, with her 5-year-old kid. So the animals the animals she has are very not docile in the way that they're sort of stupefied or anything. They're just very obedient. They know how to work. They won't buck that kid off, hopefully. And here's one of her sons playing with a little homemade gun cut out of metal. And you can see the terrain. This is south of Big Bend. It's that same sort of scrubby, deserty, mountainy terrain. One of our little boys. And that is that. So yeah, let me stop sharing my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. Oh, hold on. There. I'm back.
We see you, yeah.
Let me stop sharing. There I am.
Well, we already have several comments and questions for you.
Okay.
In fact, Linda commented right off the bat. This was from the beginning of your program when you were talking about the Mackenzie's auction and that period of time in their annual seasonal life, that must be an extremely stressful time for the family, preparing and worrying about the outcome and then dealing with what the outcome is.
Right. It's incredibly stressful. So they really build up. A few years ago, the cattle market was really high, which means price per pound was really up. And so what happened? Everyone said, let's breed more so we can make more. So then what happened? The market went down horribly, and it bottomed out, and then it kind of recovered, and then it went down again, and then it kind of recovered. So I was there in those 2 years. It lasted a little, I mean, it's been a little rocky. It's back on the rise. So it's very, very stressful. They pay a lot of attention to what semen they're going to buy. I mean, they want to buy and breed animals that aren't soft-footed, that can stand walking around. It's something as simple as that. Don't need too much water because water's far. Don't weigh too much, because if they have to travel from this side all the way to the other side to eat, they're going to burn a lot of calories. That, you know, it's like this whole little game. It's very stressful. On the day of the auction, neighbors from 150 miles away come in. It's advertised. You can hear it on the radio, the McKinsey auction. There's a pre-auction gathering where they serve enchiladas or whatever they do. People are talking. People see each other. It's a great big reunion, and then the auction starts. And yes, the family is paying very close attention, because they can withstand a little bit of a hit, but they're, you know, margins on ranches are very thin. They are barely making it most of the time. So they're really hoping they break even plus a little bit more. Yes.
Well, and I, because I worked in Fort Stockton, I knew Lydia and Sarah's parents, and I can remember being at their house when it was time to cut hay, and I remember those conversations about the timing and how very hard they worked, what long hours they kept, because the moisture might be right at 2 a.m. And so they were out there working at all hours of the day and night, and so I witnessed that myself firsthand.
Right. And from what I understand, and I'm not by any means a botanist or a hay specialist, if you let it dry too long, you start losing protein in the hay, and so it just becomes drier. I mean, in my mind, I just think it just becomes increasingly cardboardy, like it increasingly becomes of no nutritional value. So, and if you, like Lena said, I mean, at 2 a.m, because if you do it too fast, you bale it and the whole thing's rotten, and then you lose hundreds and hundreds of pounds of hay. That hay operation that the McKinseys have, and I loved Sarah and Lydia. I thought they were awesome people. And I'm so glad, Lena, you got to see pictures of them, because you know that family. My mind just went. Sarah and Lydia, yes, they can't. Oh, they said to me that hay production, what little money they could glean off of selling bales of hay, kind of carried them through a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's definitely an art to determining just the right time to get out there and cut. So I have another question. Has the ranch-related work of Irwin Smith or Laura Wilson to other photographers, has their work been an influence to you regarding this project?
I love documentary photographers, and I look at photography all the time. Everybody's photography all the time. Before I did this, I was a war photographer. I think the common thread between all of my photography has been documentary photography. Laura Wilson is a documentary photographer as well. I love her work. I've seen plenty of her shows. And of course, I think we all rub off on each other. And I think we all try to, by looking at each other's work, we all try to make ourselves better, and also try to see maybe what we're not seeing, right? Through the eyes of somebody else. Photography is such a personal experience. When you take a picture, in my case, especially a documentary project, you know, it's so important for whatever you're looking at to sort of move through you. You can't stand on the outside. It's actually got to pass through you. So seeing how that energy passes through another photographer is super important for me. I get to, maybe it blows my mind a little bit, and I get to figure out how to see something a little differently. So yes. Bottom line, all photographers have something to do with my photography. It's all, we're all sucking from the same bowl. We really are. So.
I have a comment from a attendee who says that her family recently closed a multi-general family business, and it was incredibly hard. That difficulty must be multiplied exponentially if land is involved. Kudos to those families that are making it work.
Agreed. Stopping something. I just had breakfast at the Paris Coffee Shop, right on Magnolia in Fort Worth. He's going to close that. That business is going to move out of his family's business sometime in March of this year. Somebody else has bought it, right? Not news, Bud Kennedy and Star Telegram reported it. And I've visited with him informally. Closing businesses that have to do with your family, that, that's your family. You remember that, you grew up in that space, you grew up hearing those stories. Yeah, no, I commiserate. I mean, yes, of course, it must be terrible. And to lose land, yes, it must be terrible. When I was with Ann Doherty and we were driving through all the different pastures before we got to hers, which was deep into the land down this big wrong road, hers was at the very end, and all these other lands had belonged to cousins and uncles, and all that had been sold off to different people. She was quite nearly in tears a lot of the time because she was like, yeah, my dad put those fences in. Yeah, my dad put that gate in. I remember sitting on that tree. We planted that thing. Of course, it's emotional. Terrible.
Right. Linda wants all of our attendees to know that the library has a small collection of photographs of Pete Burnett, his family, scenes from the Bonds Ranch, and the collection has not been digitized, but the finding aid is available online, and she's included the link to that in the chat. So if anybody's interested, if you would check out the chat, that line will be right there for you handy. Another question, what role did race and class play in the ranching experiences that you had?
I think ranching is a great equalizer. I don't think anyone is worried about who is richer or who is poorer. Everybody, and you could see that at the parties that happened. You could see that when we all herded animals. The owners who own this huge expanse are working just as hard as the workers. They're right. It's like a mom and pop business, right? So everyone is working together. Race. So there were some helpers that only spoke Spanish, but that didn't matter. Those families were integrated because the people that worked for the people that I photographed had worked for the parents. The parents had worked for the parents, and the grandparents had worked for the grandparents. They were as much part of the land as the owners of that land. Race and class, I think, ranch work is a great equalizer. Everyone is tired, everyone's hot. It's not about race or class. It's about getting this thing done right now. And it's pretty unpleasant to do it. So let's just get it done. Yeah. So.
Okay. Another comment, margins are really tight all the way up the food chain, and raising beef in particular, and several of your subjects were raising at least part or all cattle. Raising beef is a tough and expensive process. Did any of the women that came to ranching by marriage, did they have any particular comments to you about the learning curve for them, about learning about the cattle business?
Yeah, especially somebody that I spoke to a lot about this was, who was this? I'm looking at my clip notes. Oh, it was Danielle in Coleman. She talks about a ranch key, right? So she talks about having a special notebook where she takes notes on what fertilizer to lay down when, what's the dilution, when to know, how to look at the fur of an animal and determine how at 3 months it's going to be. If you look at an animal at 3 months, how do you know how big it's going to be? She has this whole catalog of information that she's been taking notes on since she's been part of the family. Leanna, I just spaced on, there's a big noise outside, so I just spaced on the question. Repeat the question, the tail end of it.
Well, my question, which was kind of feeding on the comment about how tough it is to raise cattle, and I was just wondering, because I acknowledge it is, no matter what livestock it is, there are so many challenges, but beef in particular. And so I was just wondering, the women who married into the family, who did not come with a ranching background, if they spoke any about the learning curve that they experienced as they came to be ranch workers with everybody else.
Right. So there was a great big learning curve. A lot of them, you think that you would know how to ranch. You think that would just be something like, you know how to have a dog, I have dogs, I can ranch, but it's not like that at all. It's very time sensitive. It's very timed. It's very, you have to know when rain's fixing to come in. You have to know if we're fixing to have a freeze. You have to know so many things, and you don't know that at birth. So yes, the learning curve is very huge. Jill was a school teacher when she married Bill. That's the opening picture of that big, beautiful expanse. She talks about it taking her years to figure out how to do it, and still trying to learn how to do it. Danielle actually keeps a formal book where she takes notes and she studies it, and then she goes back. It's almost like a recipe book, right? That you'd have from your grandma. So how to do this, and then she goes back and tweaks it, and then okay, the brand name's changed on the vaccination, so let's try this instead of this, because she wants to get it right. And I think so much of ranching too is an oral history that's passed down. How do you take care of animals? How do you take care of the land? What does it mean to take care of the land? And sort of recently that's changed a little bit, right? Maybe some people think taking care of the land is taking all the animals off it. Well, that's not these people's experience. These people's experience is, let's have animals on it and let's figure out how to take care of the land. So knowledge has changed. There is definite transference from the elders. There has to be. I can't imagine starting from zero with a ranch and knowing how to do that. Learning curve is high. And yes, to iterate what you said from the beginning, margins are very thin. They are not rich people, land rich. Not wealthy people, though. Very difficult economically.
Right.
Another person wanted to know, were the children in the families active in 4-H? Did they raise animals to show at fairs, that nature of things?
They do. And what was surprising to me, except for Rachel that had that brood of boys, all of the kids that I saw, the parents all had intentions to educate beyond college, like PhDs. Oh, my kid's going to go be a lawyer, then he's going to come be back. Oh, he's going to go be a vet, then he's going to come back. They were very active in 4-H, and they were very big on education. It's not education. I think ranchers see, as maybe many of us do, as education being a very important key to not only keeping it together, but to growing it, to making sure you know how to keep this huge asset together. And so, yes, 4-H, lots of goats. Goats, I guess, are the thing in 4-H. People love goats in 4-H. So lots of goats and lots of old goats from kids that are now grown up and come back to the ranch.
We have another comment from one of our attendees that she was just saying that when she moved to Texas, she learned what she knew about the state from cattle ranchers, and that what a firm foundation of learning she got from them, especially about their love of the land.
Their love of the land and their work ethic. I mean, we can say, like, what I really tried to do, I mean, coming from the city, I think my political views are probably very different than the country, right? So taking all that away, take religion away. What people, I believe, on ranches are about is really hard work, family, knowing where you come from, and traditions. And traditions being, we all sit down together and eat. We all wake up early to work. We all say thank you, those kinds of traditions as well. So, yeah, that's all I've got to say.
Okay. Let's see.
It's so weird. I come to the end of a question, Lana, and I don't know how to end it. I just like, oh, whatever.
In the process of your research, did you learn of any Hispanic or Black women who were ranching?
So I met some Hispanic families that were not ranching cattle, they were farming. So down in Sonora, down South Texas, between Sonora and Fort Stockton, there's melon farms, there's vegetables that are grown down there. And I met a lot of families down there. And those families, strangely, were Hispanic. And I didn't meet, like, all the farmers that I met sort of peripherally at these gatherings, at these parties. All the farmers that I met were Hispanic. I didn't meet ranchers that were Hispanic or Black. I just didn't. How did I find these women? I started with one. I contacted all the ranching organizations I could. My assistant did. She called everybody, set up meetings. I went to all of them. They sent me somewhere else. They sent me somewhere else. Oh, I've got a cousin who has a cousin who has a cousin who's ranching out way the heck there. And that's how I ended up. So maybe my group of people was too limited because of that. They're not necessarily all related to each other, but they're about 5 degrees of separation from each other, all of them. But in my work, when I went from ranch to ranch, I didn't see any Hispanic or Black owned ranches, but I didn't not look for them either. I just found ranches that I found.
Okay. We have another comment that ranching is a business first and foremost, and mentioning that the 4-H projects often turn into cash through selling the animals they raise. And I can add to that I know I married into a ranching family, and so I know that my husband and his sister went to stock shows. They showed because that money would go towards college. And also I know they were involved in the stock showing a lot for those reasons. And another attendee has mentioned that the Whitliff collection down at Texas State in San Marcos also has a lot of photography and is available digitally.
Would love, yeah, I'll take a look at that. Thank you. Fantastic.
Yeah. Linda, have we missed anything else?
I'm just trying to double check on that and accidentally minimized my chat instead of scrolling. So I think we've got all the questions.
Okay, in this last minute or two, if somebody has anything else, please let us know. And someone did have one more thing. What piqued your interest to begin this journey to document the women's lives? And that's something I was actually going to ask.
You know, it was such an interesting time in my life. And at that point in my life, I felt like I felt like I needed to be out there in the big wild. I felt like I needed to see women. I felt like I needed to record what this life was going to look like. I don't know how long we'll have ranches like this. You know, maybe Burger King is selling, fake beef now. I mean, I don't know how long. I hope it lasts forever and ever. But as a documentary photographer, I know that it won't. And I wanted to create a document that 50 years from now, somebody opens this book and says, wow, that's what it looked like. Oh man, that's what that life looked like. And these are the things that they did. And this is what they thought. And this is how it worked. Oh, that was our grandparents, age ago. That we haven't had ranches like that in a long time. And I wanted to do that. So that I'm a native Texan. I was born in San Antonio and got to Fort Worth when I was 2. And I've lived here. This is my hometown. I went to Fort Worth Country Day. I grew up on the west side off of Camp Bowie. And I wanted to see fantastic, awesome, earth-filled women. I don't know. My mom was very, very sick. She would die in the middle of this project. So she was very, very sick. And I just needed to see fantastically strong, powerful women in action that were Texan. I don't know. And it called to me. And I went there and to these different places. And it was this big, long journey for me. I think what I found is kind of like ultimate womanness. I found women who were gorgeous and powerful and loving and soft and hard and unbelievable. I think in Fort Worth, with all of our highly educated jobs and highly educated selves, we're sort of removed from that, right? A lot of us don't even cook very much, right? We're very removed from hands-on. And going to those ranches, it's like I found a strong, powerful kind of woman out there. And when I did the first one, that kind of got me hooked on the next woman, which got me hooked on the next story. And then it just sort of started rolling together. Long story, lots of chatting about this now, but the long and the short of it is, I just wanted to record a part of Texas that I suspect won't last another 100 years. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to last. And I wanted there to be a document of it so that in 100 years on some Zoom conference call, they can be like, oh, in the library, there's a document that shows what ranches are like. Go check that book out. And that might give them an idea. That's why.
Did you always envision it being a book?
I didn't. It sort of came together. I didn't know if I could thread it all together. Right? I mean, how can I really thread it together? And after a few ladies, I was like, well, maybe there's a book here that tells a bigger story about ranches in Texas. And being a man in Texas is fantastic. A man on ranches is fantastic. We always think of cowboys, right? But we don't think of women on ranches as much, or they're kind of like somewhere in the back. I mean, these women stood right next to every guy in their life, and they're just as much a part of our cultural identity as the guys are, really. So I didn't think of it as a book, but then it quickly became a book.
Well, and you hinted at the answer to this question, but somebody wanted to specifically ask, did some of these women know each other personally, and do any of them trade stories or commiserate or anything?
Right.
So different women.
Right. So they know each other in the context of these gatherings and in the context of Cattle Raisers Association meetings. Fort Worth Stock Show. Oh, we all see each other in Houston, once a year. Oh, we're at the big auction and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they all see each other year after year. Some of them say, some of them said, oh yeah, we used to barrel race when we were in school together. I mean, they've known each other. It's a small world, right? It's kind of a small world. And do they commiserate? Yes. They visit with each other. They're eager to get together. They swap stories on how to raise their children. They swap, it's funny because I've been in a room when different women from different ranches have come together, and it's, how are you doing? How are your boys? How's your husband? We got so much rain, how are the steers? Are they fat? I mean, it's really ranch talk between these ladies, in addition to family talk. So yes, they know each other, and yes, they commiserate. They know each other. Maybe they're not best friends. They know each other a few people removed from each other.
Understand. Well, as we wrap things up, did you want to share your email address with our attendees in case they'd like to contact you with other questions?
If anybody has any questions, I live off of Magnolia. I grew up in Fort Worth. It's pretty cool to have a book, but I'm just like a person. So if I can help anybody with anything, please holler at me. Here is my email. There it goes. Yes. Oh, I saved it to panelists. Oh, see, I feel like such a neophyte.
Well, and
panelists and attendees. Yes, ma'am.
It appears that after your Alyssa.
Alyssa.
Oh, there. Okay, Alyssa. The second time it's right. The first time we swapped.
I made up a name. No, it's Alyssa at AlyssaBanta.com. And again, you can find it at TCU Bookstore and at Riata. What were you going to say, Linda?
I was going to ask a question that occurred to me earlier.
Yeah.
So in your photography, you were documenting two very different environments when you had the ranch in East Texas versus the ranch in the ranches that were down south, Fort Stockton,
Far west,
Alpine.
right.
Yeah. So I know that the number of cattle you can run on a certain amount of land
Acreage
varies very much based on the grass and
very
so
much.
Did you feel like that had any particular impact on the women?
I think it does. I think it's harder to ranch south, right? So ranching south, Lena, maybe you remember the number. Is it 11 acres per one head? Is that what the number is?
I don't recall off the top of my head, but it's remarkably low.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. You need a spread. You need land to ranch any quantity of animals south. In East Texas, I believe 7 animals fit on an acre. There's grass. It's not as strenuous on the animal.
Yeah.
So what happens? In the South, they get on a horse and their work days, when they go to work, right? Those many several events throughout the year, it takes them a week to handle their animals. It is humongous land because anything smaller and you just have a few pets. I mean, you don't have anything viable economically. In East Texas and further north, Saginaw, all this area up here, north of Austin, it's verdant and it's a little less, the razor thin economy is still there. The love of family is still there. The love of being a rancher and multi-general ranches is still there, but it's a little less sort of taxing, I would say. And you don't need as much. So the ranches are smaller and kind of maybe more efficient versus down there, they're just huge because they have to be.
So the land down, Fort Stockton, Alpine, that area, it's less expensive per acre, but you can get less return out of the same amount of land, would you say?
Right. So one of the things that Sarah McKenzie said is it is so expensive to start ranching, and she's in Fort Stockton, because you need to buy so much land. Maybe it's smaller I don't know what it costs per acre, but you just need so much more. That land that Jill and Bill, that huge expanse, I mean, I don't know what kind of crazy millions and millions and millions of dollars that would take. A heck of a lot. Are they super millionaires? No. If they sold everything, I guess they would be, but that's not really what they're about, right? They'd rather ranch. So yeah, I don't know what the price of land is. It's just that it's so hard to start from zero. And Sarah also, she and I talked a lot about the economy, the economics of ranching. You need an extraordinary amount of money. Like I don't believe you could start, honestly, right now, because you would have to come, unless you were a super, 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 super millionaire, because you just couldn't afford it. You'd have to either be given the land or inherit it or marry into it. It's not quite really possible to buy that much land anymore.
Okay, well, I think we have answered everybody's questions. And
thanks everyone for coming.
Yes, I want to thank everyone for being here with us. I want to thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. We have enjoyed this so much, and really, you've done just beautiful work that will document what it was like for 50 years from now. That's a terrific accomplishment. And Linda, unless you have something else to add, I think we're ready to wrap things up.
I think that's it. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Thank y'all so much. Right. And please, anybody that's listening, please reach out if I can ever help you, or if you want to chat about ranches, please, or just chat. I'm right here, Fort Worth girls. So please, honestly, thank you so much, guys. And I'm sorry, this is so new to me. I know I was talking to Linda and Leanna about it being old school Zoom, but I get on Zoom so infrequently, and I'm distracted by the ambulance that drove by and everything else. So sorry, I lost track of some of the questions and the answers. I'm sorry.
No, you did great. You did great,
good.
Really.
Thank y'all so much.
Well, thanks everybody, and go out and have a great day.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.